What has happened that is utterly extraordinary in the charts is the complete disappearance of bands. The complete disappearance of bands. And so soloists and duos and, collaborations of soloists, Dave and Central C, all this sort of thing, are so dominant. I'll tell you how dominant they are. We've had half a decade, roughly so far, the first half of the 2020s. So I looked at the first half of the 1980s. And in the first half of the 1980s, there were 146 weeks when bands were number one. Okay, 146 weeks. You had Dexys, you got UB40, Casey and the Sunshine Band, Duran Duran, Culture Club, Pretenders, Spandau Ballet, Adam and the Ants, loads and loads and loads, 146. The first half of the 90s, there were 141 weeks when bands were number one. New Kids on the Block, Wet, 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 Erasure, Take That, loads and loads. So we've got 146, 141. In the first 5 years of this decade, 3 weeks.
No.
We have had 3 number one weeks, one of which was the Radio 1 Live Lounge All-Stars, most of whom were soloists anyway. One of which was the Beatles, when they had the lovely comeback single, and one of which was Little Mix. And that's the only kind of official band who've had a single week at number one in this entire decade.
Oh my God.
Isn't that crazy?
Is it sort of a sort of hyper individualization of things nowadays? And you see it in comedy as well. We talked before about why you don't really see very many sketch shows, and stand up is such a sort of a magnetic thing, sort of the individual gladiator, as it were. Yeah,
I think 100% that. I think also, there are various cultural things in that, if you come from, the London grime scene, then it's very individualized on. So people will collaborate an awful lot, but you wouldn't collaborate necessarily in a band. So there's lots of little reasons. But essentially, if you look at all of those names and the bands who are around, and, everyone was in a band, no one is in a band anymore, apart from all these Korean bands. There's even this week's top 40. There is not a single band formed in this century in the top 40 of the singles charts or the album charts.
Music industry doesn't like mavericks. The reason why there are no bands now is because in the 90s, Oasis and Primal Scream and Blur and Pulp and all those, we were the mainstream. And what the music industry doesn't like, the mainstream being a load of fellas on drugs, drunk half the time on a Tuesday. But they don't like that. They like people like Harry Styles, who they say, wear this dress and shut it. Wear this, sing that, and go home.
I awoke late this morning because I had been doing a gig last night down in London at the Camden Club in Camden Town with Tim Bonus. So I got in late, about 3 o'clock in the morning. I usually get up quite early, but this morning I'd had a little lie-in. So I decided to see what was going on YouTube, and I saw Rick Beato had a new video out, and he is talking about the lack of bands in contemporary music, especially the lack of bands in the charts. And he has done a video called Where Have All the Bands Gone? Now, I was a little bit annoyed with myself because I've been working on this video for a few weeks now, which was going to be a much more complex video using lots of different footage and looking at the OASIS reunion. And in the end, that morphed into the video that is coming out tomorrow, which looks at the sort of the dialectic contained within the Gallagher brothers and how that relates to how we see the way creativity is put out into the world. It's a very esoteric, philosophical video. Because of that, I didn't actually, in that video, address what I want to address here. And now Rick's on to address it, which is no problem. So, at the beginning of this video is preceded by a number of different clips from various sources. And right at the top of this video, we have Richard Osman saying, relating the actual statistical data of how little there has been bans in the last 10 years or so in the UK charts. And when we say not very many, we're talking three bands, and they're not really bands. Bands have gone. Now, I bring up the gig last night because a couple of things happened last night. But before we get into that, you must remember that I am in a band, and we travelled down to London, and an audience came in, and we got up on stage, and we played, and we tried to entertain the audience using Tim Bonus's brilliant songs. We tried to infuse them with something that can only exist in a live concert, where we improvise and we push the material out. And also Tim talked to the audience, and Tim is a brilliant raconteur. If anyone's seen him on the album Years, could see that is the case. And he was very funny. And a lot of the members in the audience that came up to me afterwards agreed. They had an entertaining night of music. Right, so in the audience was a whole bunch of people of a certain status. Stephen Wilson came down to watch the gig. And this gave it a little bit of an edge for us on stage, because we knew it wasn't just the audience who was in, but there was also people that we really respect watching it. And there was two audience members that I invited down. One was Mona Zam, and the other was Mark Mondaisy, who are British jazz musicians and phenomenal musicians. Mo can play jazz fusion guitar like the John McLaughlins and Baldi Miolas. He's that type of player. And Mark Mondaisy is one of my drum heroes. I was really influenced by him going back almost 40 years when I first saw him in the Courtney Pine Band, and then he went on to play with people like Jethro Tull, Jan Hammer, John McLaughlin, Jeff Beck. He's a heavyweight player. And I did joke with him a little bit about, what it feels like to be in front of your peers, and trying to do a good job, and all the sort of psychology that goes on with that. But the point is, all of that grist that was in that room, and me trying to do my best, and some nights it would be great, other nights not so great. This was in the middle. I had some good moments and some not so good moments. And then you go home and you're with the band, you're driving home and you talk about those moments. All of this are attributes that never get discussed when it comes down to bands. Bands have a whole thing around them, which I think is very valuable and does not exist at all in the computer-based music that now dominates mainstream music, mainstream popular music. Now, there's a couple of things that happened last night. We had a guy there that was helping us load in, a brilliant photographer and a brilliant drummer that helps us on a lot of our London gigs. And we started to talk about the music industry. And I was trying to explain to him that the problem that bands have is that they see their fundamental structure, in other words, the thing they wrap their creativity around, as being the album. They're trying to make an album, and then they want to release that album and promote that album, and they want to go out and gig. And none of those things are viable or have any bearing in the modern world. They don't exist anymore. It's like here in the UK, somebody tried to sell kippers for breakfast. In the 1930s and 40s, the most popular meal for the British person was a kipper, and we had a huge kipper industry. And then people changed their mind. They didn't want kippers anymore, and there's no longer that industry there. It happens over and over again. And so I feel that it's not the fact that nobody likes music anymore. It's the fact that the structure which bands are looking at as the way to promote themselves, because there is a band and there's a folklore that that exists around a band. The band has to do a certain thing. So if you form a band, you know, you go down the rehearsal room, you write your songs, then you do your demo, you send it to the record labels. If they like it, they sign you, and then they will take it all over for you, and they will sort of just release you into the world. And because you're so brilliant, you know, everyone will buy your albums, you'll become a huge success. And I was trying to explain it's not there anymore. The music is part of the media industry now. It's a small cog in that, like everything else, like photography and filmmaking and sound design and the written word. This is all now wrapped up in the media, and the media makes its money through advertising primarily. You are looking at a platform right now that makes its money through advertising, and the way that works is that I do these videos. These videos are on a certain subject. They attract a certain demographic. The YouTube knows that demographic is here, so they can sell you stuff directly, hopefully, into the interests that you have. And so what's really important is for me to hit the demographic. And when you work on YouTube, you're very aware that you are trying to do something that will capture as much of that demographic as you possibly can. Some of the skills you have to use are a bit dodgy. You know, if you're a YouTuber, you are chasing views and you are being clickbaity. And the way I try and get around that is by doing that very thing, but embedding the videos with at least something that is a little bit beyond just the sheer clickbaity approach, that there's some sort of a message in there that might be of use to somebody that's out there, either a listener or a creative musician. But one of the interesting things was, you know, in that room was a bunch of really incredible players. And when the topic of Oasis came up, there's a certain snottiness towards Oasis. They are not virtuoso musicians. And when they're interviewed, they swear a lot and they say contentious things. And, there's a certain section of society that finds that quite, displeasing. And I think those two things have, for proper musicians, has placed Oasis in a certain bracket. Now, on another video on here, I've said that is fundamentally the most important thing about Oasis, is that Oasis personified the dream that I am saying no longer exists. And this is that normal working class people that do not have contacts, who have not been trained in what is culturally sophisticated, can form a band, put their songs on a tape and take over the whole world. And so for me, the Oasis reunion next year is a little chink of light, because what it says is, it says, look, these guys are a band, and what people want to buy is these two guys getting together, not recording separately, not Noel recording his guitar plot and then dialing it in and producers sticking it with Liam, not that, but people actually want to see them together on stage, because that is a saleable commodity to the tune of millions. They're doing what we were trying to do last night. And I think the reason why this is not happening anymore is not because tastes have moved on or technology has moved on. I think it's because there is an ideological tussle that is going on behind all this. I haven't fully watched Rick's video, but I'm pretty sure he probably won't address this. And so this is why I'm here doing this now. So what's the ideological tussle? Well, when we look at popular music was an industry, and it was sort of originally based upon the Hollywood film industry. You found your talent, and the talent usually had to, have a reasonable voice and look good. That's the old thing. So you sign them, they're the artists. They can get up and perform, they look good, and they can sing a little bit. Then you have your songwriters, and they work like a little army in the background. They're writing songs, not particularly for anybody, just writing songs. You sign to a record company, and you go, let's take that song, put it with that artist. Let's put that together. The creative intentions of this artist, all the songwriters are irrelevant here. We're just going to put them together. Someone else is now going to put them together. And then we're going to put them in a room with a producer, and they're going to produce it in a certain way. And we start to get this product. So then we send off the singer, and we photograph them, and we give them an image, and then we give them a story. We might even make out that they've done some bad stuff so they can get in the news, and that will put some profile on it, and that will bring people to listen to this. Now, that has always been there in popular music. A revolution happened in the 1960s. As rock and roll emerged, that countercultural aspects that are in there, and the fact that youth wanted to do things different, and especially here in the UK, the revolution that we had with skiffle, which was a democratizing movement where suddenly musicians with perhaps less skill, but more importantly, less access to very expensive instruments could form a band and start writing music. And we know for Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin and the Beatles came out of skiffle groups. And what you had suddenly then was a self-contained unit. This was a band that could write their own stuff, they could perform their own stuff, they could play all the instruments, they could sing, and you could basically put them in the recording studio, hit record, and there you have the album. And of course, famously, the Beatles, who are the preeminent band for doing this, they did that on their first album in around about 12 hours. They just went in and performed. And this changed music because young people suddenly had control over the narrative and they could say something creative. So popular music went from being just this commercial form that just produced songs that you could tap your toe to, identify with and buy and make some money, commercial music. Suddenly commercial music could also say something very powerful. Bob Dylan emerges and he starts to sing not about love and driving around in cars and all that, fun stuff that teenagers like to do. He started to sing about all sorts of different subjects. And he had the idea of the singer-songwriter emerge. Or what we have in the classic era of rock and roll are self-contained bands that write their material, they perform their material, they play all the instruments, going into a studio and creating music in which their creative vision is in the music. A little bit like the idea that comes out of French New Wave film, the idea of the auteur. They're authors of what they do. And we have this golden period where this way of doing stuff is very, very powerful. Now, if you plot that through, and I'll call this just for the sake of argument, rock music. If we plot the history of rock music through, this sort of explodes in the 1960s and creates a very sophisticated height where bands are selling millions of records but making music which is very, very sophisticated. And it starts to move away from being a graspable thing from the normal person in the street. And in the mid-70s, we see a shift, punk, disco, and then new wave, and then goth music, and that starts to emerge. But also, there's a democratization of music that goes on in Black American music and in the music of gay culture. And out of those two forms comes hip-hop. And hip-hop is basically all you need is two turntables and a microphone and you can make music. And also, the techno that came out of the sort of house revolution in Chicago in the 1980s, where you could just get a drum machine and self-release and white label, and as long as you've got contacts with the DJs. And so through all of this, that artistic vision was still retained, okay? So even though people were making electronic music, when we go back to albums by Public Enemy or Todd Edwards, or we go back to, The Orb, or any of these bands that were making their music using computers, we still feel that there's an artistic vision permeating through that. This goes all the way through the 80s, and what happens is these new forms of music start to become more and more sophisticated. By the 90s, punk has become Nirvana and Soundgarden. And electronic music has become Aphex Twin and Square Pusher. This is very esoteric stuff. And I felt that the early 90s for music was almost like a second era of progressive rock. Very sophisticated music, incredible creative gestures. The punk that happens in 1999 is not as the same as happened. It's a return to the values that existed before rock music emerged. And I place that, the thing that demarks that for me is the release of Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears. I can remember when she went to number one, that suddenly emerged. I can remember watching that with sort of bewilderment would be the only way to describe it. Because it wasn't towing the line, It's like Oasis has been having hit records, you know, whether you liked them or not, and they were good, strong songs, but they made that music, and they made it with guitar, bass, and drums, and they went and recorded studio. It was their creative vision, whereas there was just this girl, teenage girl, you know, and it was a great big manipulation of the record companies. Brilliant song, you know, well-written song. Now, I'm sure you're going to shout that this happened before, and I think it did. But if we go back to the artist before Britney Spears, we go back to Madonna, we still feel this very strong personality and creative vision of a Madonna cutting through. I didn't feel it with Britney Spears. There was a shift there. And I think at that point, popular music atrophied. And by the mid-2000s, what had emerged there with this, which was this return to the Svengali approach to popular music, that was stuck, and we haven't moved on since. All that's happened is the computers have got more and more sophisticated, and the music has become more and more computerized. And so the argument goes is that, you know, why would you want to take a band into a recording studio and spend all that money trying to record a song with those real musicians when a kid can just, you know, set up a computer in their bedroom and, you know, make a track for virtually nothing and give it to a singer and they can get a track out there. And I know some of you will be shouting out saying, yeah, and surely if someone's making it in their bedroom like that, they can have a creative vision. They could definitely have a creative vision musically, but what they're saying, they no longer say anything. And the reason for that is because ideologically there has been a shift. And we do not perceive, or I'm saying the generation below us do not perceive popular music in the same way as we do. There has been an ideological shift away from complexity musically, and complexity in terms of the conceptual framework and meaning in which these songs are written. And so it looks like, oh, well, that's a shame. What are we going to do then? Well, I think that framework is now 20 years old. And at the moment, ideologically, we can see things cracking left, right and centre. And people on both sides of the political divide are seeing the structure upon which they stand not being that solid anymore. And I think the sort of narcissistic aspects of social networking, which has created the sort of filtered view of beauty, the filtered view of musical perfection, has created a kind of perfection which is now anti-human. And that is what us people who grew up listening to Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin, where you could hear the humanity in that music because it was just four guys in a room playing, we respond to the lack of humanity in popular music. Is that really what it is? It's not because it's computer music, it's not because it's programmed, it's because it lacks soul. So what was interesting is when I finished the gig last night, I go and sit down with Mark Mondesi and Mona Zam, and these are incredible musicians with a lot of wisdom. And we start to chat, and this idea emerges of the way that popular music has moved away from the blues. And what made me think this when I arrived at the venue is that this guy that was helping us in with the gears, he had a Soundgarden t-shirt on, and I thought Soundgarden sold millions and millions of albums, tens of millions of albums. You go back 30 years and that type of popular music is much, much closer to the blues. What Chris Cornell's doing, what Kim Thile's doing, what Matt Cameron's doing. You know, Matt Cameron's trying to get a groove. He's trying to get that lumpy swinginess. Kim Thile is trying to get the bends and in between the notes and the scream. And Chris Cornell is trying to emote using all that colour in his voice and the cracks and all that type of stuff. We have moved away from the blues, all right? Now, I don't think these things go away. And the truth is that what we have in popular music now is a producer will produce a track And the actual music that they've produced really does not matter. That will be taken in to a big company and a label. And this Svengali approach will look at their artist who will be being promoted as a gangster or sexual deviant or whatever it is that's pulling in the audience, that's pushing all those nasty buttons that work so well on the internet. They will then struggle to try and get the right sentiment to that track. And the sentiment that we of our age, when we listen to the likes of a track like WAP, it's quite horrified that is the low level that popular music has dropped to. You have to understand that that's been thought out, and when you look at the writers on it, there's been a lot of writers that have contributed to be able to push all those buttons to get the views on that video. Because the views, if you get 1 billion views on a video, you are making a lot of money. And so that process takes a long time. Okay, I think, and I'm putting it out there because there's no way I can make this happen except just put it out there. I think the bands have a technology within them that we've forgotten. And the reason we have forgotten is because of another ideological reason. My father worked in industry, worked in the car industry, quite high up in the car industry. And he was in charge of quality control. And he had to specify equipment to come in. If you're painting a car, it has to be sprayed. And then there's someone might come out with a new machine that could spray a car better. So you will go, we're going to purchase that machine. It's going to cost us 3 million quid, but it's going to make much better cars, and we won't have to have the cars returned because there's paint faults in them, blah, blah, blah. This is what quality control people think about. And he once said to me, he said, when you're buying that machine, if that machine will mow your lawn and change your trousers for you, you don't care. You don't buy anything extra than what you want. And that process is really refined so that you don't do that, except when it comes to computers and IT. Computers continue updated, they continue expanded. And when you buy the computer, it's full of all these different apps and things, and you have to keep up with that. Despite the fact of going, what do I actually want to do? I have a recording studio, and I have a Mac computer. It never goes on the internet. Came out in 2007. It never crashes. That's what I record my stuff on. It's old, but it works. I go into proper studios where they've updated these computers and they're no longer working, and they're trying to, add some app that you don't need. And I think the problem with the information technology, computers, the internet, is we feel that we need to keep up. The whole time we feel we need to keep up and do the thing that it does. So it starts to drive us. And I think that's happened in music production. The technology is entirely driving us as players. You could go into a very expensive recording studio, which is capable of doing a thing which is remarkable, which is everyone can play at the same time but still be separated. But you will find that producers now will put a click down, they will make the drummer play to a click, they will try and get a drum track first, they will try and get everything separated, and the producers now are in control of the way that that's done. And I don't think that's right. I've worked with a number of different artists that are trying to establish themselves, and I've always given them this choice. I've said, you could try and produce the stuff for yourself and be all democratized. You can buy the computer, you can get yourself an Apple MacBook Pro, and you can get, Logic Audio on there. You can stick it in your bedroom, you can get the audio interface, and you can try and record this track yourself. And in a couple of years, you might have, as well as the already developed songwriting skills that you have, you may at some point become a reasonable producer, but you might not, but you may, right? So say you have, and you will spend months and months and months and months trying to get this right, putting tracks out, sticking them up on Spotify, nobody's listening. But there's another way of doing this. Form a band, because bands are useful. And then go up the rehearsal room like Oasis used to do in the early 90s and rehearse the stuff until you've got it absolutely perfect. And then once it's perfect, ring up a studio. Go and ring up Abbey Road. Go and ring up Rockfield. Go and ring up Real World. Because nobody's in those studios anymore. See if they will do you a deal, and they often will. And you could go up, drive up to that studio, and for the cost of probably a quarter of what you were going to spend over a year trying to get this all done, you can walk in and have some of the best engineers in the world mic you up, and as long as you perform brilliantly, at the end of the day, you will walk out of that studio with a finished product which is at the quality level that is essential for you to be able to access the music industry in one day. And all you have to do is write the songs. All you have to do is then go to a studio and record those songs. Those studios are still there in one day. But the problem is you'll have is on your recording, rather than there being computers, there will be real people. Now I'm looking straight at you now because I can see where the camera is. Right? If we took all the songs in the top 20, right, all those songs, and we scrapped all the computer music off there, and we gave it to musicians, and we got them to learn it really well and bring their creativity to it. You have a specialist thinking about how the drums work, a specialist thinking how the guitars work, and they went back in and recorded those with real instruments, right, and then put it back out there. Would that song now not sell? Or could it be the case that the fact that people would suddenly hear the joy and visceral energy of people in the same room who are brought together by their love of music? This is the most important thing. The communal aspect of getting in a room together and forgetting politics, forgetting, all this crap, and just playing and trying to create an empathy, which is exactly what we were trying to do last night. And we were fighting to do it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But we were fighting to try and create a harmony between us. Fighting to find the middle ground where what we do, our own individuality, is brought together into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. This surely can still be appreciated, which is why when you go on Spotify, the vast majority of the songs that people are listening to were created in that manner. So the question is if you can go in one day, it would cost nothing for the rec companies to have some session musicians like they used to, and to go to the studio and go, come on guys, do you want to do this? And 2 hours later, the track would be finished and it would have this extra thing on it. So why aren't they doing it? And the reason is, all right, and it's personified with Oasis for me, which is why I think they're really important to bring back to the initial part of this video. And that is because the powers that be do not want the opinions of normal people. That is the killer here. Okay? They do not want those opinions. Now, if we go look at the world of hip-hop, which I also think has been decapitated by commerciality and now is nowhere near what it was in the old days, you can see how that one has been lobotomized and made impotent by the powers that be. They don't want the opinions of normal people. And I think that's what it is. The control has been returned to how it was before the era of rock and roll. Entirely returned to that now. And we have pretty little pop songs, and instead of it being, how much is that doggy in the window, now it's whoever it was, Cardi B, I don't even know who it was, singing that awful WAP song. Right, I know I'm an old guy and I should be saying something that's a little bit more relevant to now and not a track that's a couple of years old, but I really don't want to know. I really don't want to know. I love hip-hop. I used to program hip-hop beats and do hip-hop production. It's nothing to do with the computers. It's to do with people finding the voice. And there's a number of ways you can do that. And a band is a beautiful way of doing that on a number of different levels. So to answer RICK Beato's question, why is there no bands? The reason is is because the powers that be do not want drug-addled working class people who shoot their mouth off having a platform to say stuff. Thank you. So if you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed the points I'm making, you could stick a like on it. If you would like to see more, of course, you can subscribe to it and become a subscriber of my channel, which hopefully means, as long as I'm not saying anything that the powers that be don't like, they will present videos that I've done in the future before your eyes. If you want to go to a space where nobody knows what anyone is saying, the secret world of Patreon, you can go there and you will find there's 2 tiers there. You can just join as a free member and you'll get little bits and bobs and stuff. Or you could join as a paid member and support me financially in what I'm trying to do, so I can keep myself in neckerchiefs, which I have won for you today. And I hope you appreciate the little bit of visual, opulence that I brought to this video. If you also want to support me, you can support me by putting a little bit of money in my PayPal tip jar. That little dribble of money is not only keeping my family going, but is enabling me to stay in my new accommodation. Now, I can see here, I'm not in my new accommodation. I'm back in my bedroom. And the reason for that is because sometimes a video comes into my head, like today, fully formed, and I know what I want to say, and I thought, well, I'll just get up and do it. And that may well happen. Who knows? Anyway, but if you do want to support my new creative venture over at the Jellyman Heritage Arts charity, there's also a link in there to drop a few pennies into that, and that would help very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've said all that, Andy. You're done now. You're at the end. You're just dragging it out, because you like the sound of your own voice. You are, aren't you, Andy? Just press stop. The finger will now press stop.
It's just another word for conformity. It's the new way of saying conformity, diversity. You don't see anything diverse anywhere.
No.
It's all conformity.
It's having the opposite effect, in fact, isn't it?
It is, because when people talk about diversity, they don't think about the great things that we don't have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are ignored. And they always made countries very interesting, because you could travel to Germany, you could see the most incredible culture. You go to Italy, you see the most incredible culture. Now they just want everything to be the same.
Yeah.
So diversity means conformity. It doesn't mean avant-garde or let's make really interesting, strange art. It means box everybody.
Yeah.
Diversity, I think, is
It's
a
dying,
dreadful word. Pin it to anything and that situation is finished. It's a terrible word.
Like, I was going up to Manchester the other week, and fucking some guys going, "Can you put your mask on the train?" And I was like, and they said, because the transport police will get on, they'll find you £1,000, but you don't have to put it on if you're eating. So I was saying, all right, so this killer virus that's sweeping through the train is going to come and attack me, but it's going to see me having a sandwich and go, leave him. And there's like bombers roaming free around the fucking city, and our government and the government before them and the next fucking government after this one will be powerless to stop it because of some fucking hippie ideal about people's religious belief.
But there's a lot of famous people out there, so-called celebrities, that, they're famous because they're orange.
He climbed down off his bookend and went to see what it was that Emily had brought.